I was standing outside in the pitch-black cold at 5 in the morning, my truck engine rumbling while snow slammed down so hard it felt like the world was being buried alive. The headlights barely cut through it. That's when my phone started vibrating in my pocket. Once. Twice. Then non-stop. I pulled it out and saw 7 missed calls, all from the same number. The Pine Hollow Estates, HOA. My stomach dropped. That's the moment I knew this wasn't just another annoying complaint. Something was seriously wrong. Less than an hour later, I found a certified letter taped right to my front door, already dusted with fresh snow. According to the HOA, I was legally required to immediately clear snow from their private roads, without pay, or they would pursue all available legal remedies. They accused me of putting residents, children, and elderly people at risk by refusing. What they clearly didn't understand was this: I didn't live in their HOA. I never had. I wasn't a member. And I didn't work for them. I owned the only snow removal business within 40 miles of Cedar Ridge County, Wyoming. 1 truck, 1 plow, my equipment, my fuel, my labor. And instead of hiring me like any reasonable person would, the HOA decided they could bully me into working for free using threats, legal language, and intimidation. What happened after that didn't just backfire. It blew up in their faces. They lost their HOA president, tens of thousands of dollars, and their reputation in the community. And for a while, it nearly cost me my entire livelihood. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I live just outside a small town called Willow Bend, tucked into Cedar Ridge County. It's the kind of place where people still wave when they pass you on the road, where everyone knows whose truck is whose, and where snowstorms aren't treated like disasters. They're just winter doing what winter has always done. Around here, you don't panic when the snow falls. You prepare for it. I've lived here my entire life. My grandparents settled this land decades ago, and my dad built his snow removal business the same way he built everything else. Slowly, honestly, and with his own hands. When I was a kid, I rode shotgun with him at 4 in the morning while he plowed driveways and back roads. When he passed, I inherited the truck, the plow, and the responsibility. I kept the business simple. 1 truck, 1 heavy-duty plow. A list of regular customers who paid on time and treated me like a human being. I didn't get rich, but I made a steady living, and in a town like Willow Bend, that's more than enough. Things stayed that way until Pine Hollow Estates showed up. About 4 years ago, the developers came in and carved out a gated community just outside town. Big houses, long private roads, fancy entrance sign with stone pillars and iron gates. Most of the people who moved in weren't from around here. California plates, Colorado plates, Texas plates. They formed a homeowners association almost immediately, complete with bylaws, committees, and a president who liked the sound of her own authority. At first, Pine Hollow didn't affect my life at all. They hired a snow removal company from the city, someone with multiple trucks who charged premium rates. That worked for exactly 1 winter. After that, the company pulled out, too far from their base, too much work for not enough profit. It wasn't worth it to them. That's when Linda Carver, the HOA president, reached out to me. The first thing that struck me was how she spoke. She didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She didn't ask if I was available or what my rates were. She told me they expected cooperation from local businesses and that Pine Hollow needed snow cleared immediately for the safety of their residents. I gave her my standard rates, same rates I'd charged everyone else for years. She laughed, actually laughed. Then she said the HOA shouldn't have to pay emergency prices just because of weather. I calmly explained that those weren't emergency rates, That was just the cost of running heavy equipment, fuel, maintenance, insurance, and labor. She cut me off and said they'd get back to me. They never did. Instead, I started getting emails. At first, they sounded almost reasonable. Residents were concerned. Cars were stuck. Someone mentioned elderly homeowners. Another email brought up children. Then the word ambulance appeared, bolded, as if typing it louder made it my responsibility. Every message carried the same underlying message. This is your problem, and if you don't fix it, you're the bad guy. What they never did was agree to a contract or ask how to hire me properly. They just assumed that because I lived nearby, because I had a plow, because I was local, I should step in and solve their problem for free. I replied once, and only once. I kept it short and professional. I don't plow without a contract or payment agreement. That was it. No insults, no attitude, just a boundary. The response was immediate and hostile. Suddenly, I wasn't a small business owner protecting his livelihood. I was a villain. They accused me of refusing emergency aid, of exploiting a vulnerable community, of holding the town hostage because I was the only option. Someone even used the word monopoly, like I'd personally chased every other snowplow out of the county. A week later, the certified letter showed up. Reading it felt different than the emails. Emails are easy to ignore. Letters on official paper, with legal language and threats spelled out in black ink, hit harder. They weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. According to them, I was legally obligated to clear their private roads immediately or face consequences. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an HOA being pushy. This was an HOA willing to lie, threaten, and misuse the law to get what they wanted. And that's when Pine Hollow crossed the line, from annoying to dangerous. After that letter showed up, everything moved from tense to outright hostile almost overnight. My phone started ringing constantly. Not just emails anymore. Actual calls. Angry calls. Desperate calls. Calls from people whose names I didn't recognize and numbers I'd never seen before. Some of them tried guilt. Others went straight to threats. Every conversation followed the same script. Why won't you just do the right thing? One man actually drove out to my place unannounced. I was in the driveway checking the plow when he marched up and told me his wife was pregnant, that she could go into labor at any moment, and that if something happened because the roads weren't plowed, it would be on me. He said it like a verdict had already been decided. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I told him the same thing I told everyone else. I don't work for free, and I don't work without a contract. He shook his head like I'd personally insulted him and drove off, spinning snow as he left. That was the moment I realized the HOA wasn't just stirring panic. They were actively sending people to pressure me face to face. A few days later, the county got involved. I received a notice saying Pine Hollow Estates had filed a formal complaint accusing me of refusing essential services. Reading those words made my chest tighten. Essential services. That wasn't just a complaint. That was a legal framing. That's when it hit me that they weren't just upset anymore. They were trying to weaponize the system against me. I was summoned to a meeting at the county administration building. When I walked into the room, Linda Carver was already there, seated comfortably with a neat stack of papers in front of her. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The kind that says, I planned this, Ish. She spoke confidently, like someone used to getting her way. She told the administrator that Pine Hollow residents were being put in danger, that children couldn't get to school, that elderly homeowners were trapped. She repeated the word emergency over and over, even though no emergency had been declared. Then she made her real argument. Because I was the only snow removal operator within reasonable distance, she claimed I had a responsibility to serve the public. She said refusing to plow their private roads amounted to negligence. She even implied that I was exploiting the situation by refusing to act unless I was paid. Listening to her talk, you'd think I was some kind of villain hoarding resources instead of a guy with one truck trying to keep his business afloat. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I asked one question. Since when is a private contractor legally required to work for free? The room went quiet. No one answered. Not the administrator. Not Linda. Not a single person in that room could point to a law, a statute, or a rule that backed up what she was claiming. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Instead of backing down, the HOA escalated again. I received notice that they were considering challenging my business license. The accusation this time was price gouging during emergencies, even though my rates hadn't changed in years and there was no declared emergency. That's when the fear really set in. This wasn't about one job anymore. This wasn't even about snow. This was about my ability to keep working at all. If they managed to damage my license or reputation, I could lose everything I'd spent my life building: my customers, my income, my future. And the worst part was realizing that Linda and the HOA knew exactly what they were doing. They couldn't force me to plow directly, so they were trying to squeeze me until I broke. At that point, I stopped thinking of Pine Hollow as a nuisance. I started seeing them for what they really were: a group willing to intimidate, threaten, and bend the system to get free labor, no matter who they hurt in the process. I didn't sleep much that week. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind kept running through worst-case scenarios: losing my business, my truck, everything my dad had built. The stress sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I'd get up in the middle of the night and check my phone, half expecting another message or notice to be waiting. That's when my cousin Mark called me. Mark works as a deputy in the county, and he's not the type to exaggerate. When he says something matters, it matters. He told me he'd looked into Pine Hollow Estates after hearing my name come up again. What he found wasn't surprising, but it was important. Pine Hollow had filed more complaints in the last 2 years than any other homeowners association in Cedar Ridge County. Noise complaints, road complaints, fence complaints, animal complaints, always about someone else, always escalated. And almost every single one of them had the same name attached: Linda Carver. Mark told me the county staff recognized her name the moment it came across their desks. She complained often, loudly and aggressively. Most of the time, nothing came of it. But she never stopped. Hearing that flicked a switch in my head. Up until that point, I'd been reacting emotionally. Frustrated, angry, worried about what they might do next. After that call, I stopped reacting and started preparing. I began documenting everything. Every email Pine Hollow sent me, every voicemail, every letter. I wrote down dates, times, names, and exact wording. I saved screenshots and backed them up in multiple places. I made notes about the residents who showed up at my property and what they said. I stopped answering calls altogether and forced all communication into writing. If they wanted to play the legal game, I was going to make sure there was a record. That same week, I hired a local attorney named Tom Harris. Tom wasn't flashy: small office, old wooden desk, the kind of lawyer who listens more than he talks. I handed him the stack of papers and emails I'd already collected. He read quietly for a long time. When he finally looked up, the first thing he said was blunt and honest. "They don't have a strong case," he said, "but they're not trying to win clean. They're trying to bury you in process." He explained that even weak claims can be dangerous if someone keeps filing complaints, hearings, and lawsuits. The goal isn't always to win. Sometimes it's just to exhaust the other person until they give in. Tom sent a formal response to the HOA on my behalf. It denied every allegation point by point. It clarified that I had no legal obligation to provide free services. It also warned Pine Hollow that continued harassment could expose them to liability. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. I thought maybe now that a lawyer was involved, they'd back off. I was wrong again. A few days later, Tom called me and told me to come by his office. When I got there, he slid a packet of papers across the desk. It was thick, formal, stamped, filed. Pine Hollow Estates had sued me. They weren't backing down, they weren't negotiating, they weren't trying to resolve anything. They were going all in, hoping the pressure would finally crush me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a dispute anymore. It was a fight. The lawsuit was worse than I expected. According to Pine Hollow Estates, I had endangered residents, violated some vague public duty, and intentionally withheld snow removal services to force higher payments. They weren't just asking for money, they wanted a court order that would force me to plow their private roads whether I wanted to or not. Reading it felt unreal, like I'd slipped into some alternate version of reality where common sense didn't exist. When I brought the papers to Tom, he actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how absurd it was. Then his expression changed, and he leaned back in his chair. "They're throwing everything they can at you," he said. "That's not confidence. That's desperation." Tom explained that most of the claims were weak on their own, but taken together, they were meant to overwhelm me. If I panicked or ran out of money, the HOA would get what they wanted without ever proving they were right. We didn't wait. Tom filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, tearing apart their arguments point by point. No contract, no legal obligation, no emergency declaration, no authority. At the same time, we filed a counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. If they wanted to drag me into court, we were going to make sure the judge saw the full picture. That alone felt empowering. But what happened next changed everything. A few days after the lawsuit was filed, I received an email from someone I didn't recognize. Her name was Amanda Brooks, and she lived inside Pine Hollow Estates. The subject line was simple: "I'm sorry." She wrote that she'd been following everything quietly, and that not everyone in the HOA agreed with Linda. A lot of residents were uncomfortable with how aggressive things had become, but they were afraid to speak up. Linda was loud, intimidating, and controlled the board. People worried about retaliation, fines, or being singled out. Amanda told me she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She attached documents, HOA financial records. At first, I didn't fully understand what I was looking at. I forwarded everything to Tom immediately. He called me less than an hour later. His voice was different. "These are serious," he said. "Very serious." Linda had been paying her brother's law firm using HOA funds, tens of thousands of dollars over the past year. Legal fees for things that had nothing to do with legitimate HOA business. Complaints, threat letters, filings. All approved by Linda herself, without proper board authorization or homeowner votes. In other words, she wasn't just harassing me. She was funding it with other people's money. The irony was staggering. The woman accusing me of exploitation had been quietly draining HOA funds to fuel her personal vendettas. Tom advised caution. We didn't blast the information publicly. We did things the right way. We forwarded the records to the county oversight office and the state agency that handled HOA governance and financial compliance. Once those wheels started turning, there was no stopping them. The county acknowledged receipt of the documents. Then came follow-up questions. Requests for clarification. Requests for additional records. Amanda wasn't the only one who came forward after that. Other residents started sharing emails, meeting minutes, and messages that showed Linda had been acting unilaterally for a long time. Meanwhile, the lawsuit stalled. Pine Hollow requested extensions. Their tone shifted. Where they'd once been aggressive and demanding, they were suddenly cautious, almost quiet. That's when I realized the balance of power had shifted. The snowstorm that started all of this had long since melted, roads were clear, life should have gone back to normal. Instead, everything felt like it was building towards something bigger. I wasn't worried anymore, I was focused. For weeks, Linda had tried to paint me as the villain, a greedy contractor, a heartless local refusing to help his community. Now the truth was coming out, piece by piece, in official channels she couldn't bully or threaten. I didn't feel smug, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt calm. Because for the first time since that certified letter showed up on my door, I wasn't reacting to their moves anymore. They were reacting to mine. And I knew, deep down, that whatever happened next, Pine Hollow Estates would never be able to pretend this was just about snow again. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected, and by the time I walked into the courthouse, the hallway outside the courtroom was already packed. Homeowners from Pine Hollow. A few people from town. County staff. Even a local reporter I recognized. Word had spread, and everyone knew this wasn't just another small claims dispute anymore. Linda Carver arrived 10 minutes later, dressed sharply, walking in like she owned the place. She barely looked at me. She didn't have to. She was confident, almost smug, like someone who believed the system would automatically bend in her favor. I didn't feel that way at all. I sat beside Tom, a thick binder resting on the table in front of us. Inside it was everything: emails, letters, timelines, meeting notes, and records. It wasn't flashy. It was organized. And it was solid. When the hearing began, Pine Hollow's attorney went first. He painted a dramatic picture of stranded families, blocked ambulances, and a contractor refusing to help unless he was paid what they called unreasonable rates. He used words like duty, safety, and responsibility, hoping emotion would fill the gaps where facts were missing. Then it was Tom's turn. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't grandstand. He walked the judge through the situation step by step. No emergency declaration had ever been issued. No contract had ever existed between me and the HOA. No law required a private business owner to provide free services to a private community. He showed the emails where I'd repeatedly asked for a standard agreement and the responses where the HOA refused. One by one, their arguments collapsed. The judge asked a few direct questions, each one exposing another hole in Pine Hollow's case. Linda shifted in her seat as the courtroom energy changed. Confidence turned into irritation. Irritation turned into unease. Then the judge asked a question no one expected. "Can someone explain these HOA financial records?" The room went silent. Linda froze. Her attorney looked genuinely confused. He shuffled through his notes, clearly unprepared. Tom stood and explained, calmly and clearly, that documents had been submitted showing HOA funds used for legal actions that appeared unrelated to legitimate association business. Linda tried to interrupt. The judge shut her down. "What I'm hearing," the judge said, "is a dispute that may extend beyond this lawsuit." Linda's face went pale. After a brief recess, the judge returned with a decision that shifted everything. The lawsuit would not move forward until a full, independent audit of Pine Hollow Estates' finances was completed. The court needed to know whether HOA funds were being used appropriately before considering any claims brought by the association. The gavel came down. Outside the courtroom, the tension exploded. Residents surrounded Linda, demanding answers. Voices were raised. People were angry, not at me, but at her. Emergency HOA meetings were scheduled on the spot. Group texts lit up. Someone yelled that they wanted refunds. Another demanded to see the books immediately. Linda tried to regain control. She blamed misunderstandings. She blamed legal advice. She blamed bad actors. At one point, she even tried to imply that I'd somehow manipulated the situation. No one was buying it. For months she'd ruled Pine Hollow through intimidation and volume. Now, under real scrutiny, there was nowhere left to hide. Standing there on the courthouse steps, watching it all unfold, I realized something important. The HOA hadn't lost because I was louder or meaner. They lost because the truth doesn't need theatrics, it just needs daylight. And Linda Carver was finally standing in it. The audit didn't take long. Once the court ordered it, everything that had been hidden behind closed doors came out into the open, and it came out fast. The findings were devastating. HOA funds had been used to pay for Linda's personal legal battles, not just against me, but against other residents, and even local businesses that had pushed back against her in the past. Tens of thousands of dollars had been spent without proper approval. Payments were made without board votes. Some expenses were mislabeled, others weren't labeled at all. Worse than that, the auditors found irregularities that went beyond bad judgment. There were missing records, inconsistent reporting, transactions that didn't match meeting minutes. It wasn't just sloppy, it was reckless. When the results were shared with the homeowners, Pine Hollow erupted. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and this time it wasn't Linda running the show. Homeowners packed the room, angry and demanding answers. People who had been silent for years finally spoke up. Questions flew faster than Linda could answer them. She tried to explain it away. She claimed the legal actions were necessary. She said the HOA had been under threat. She insisted she was only doing what was best for the community. No one believed her. When the vote to remove her as HOA president was called, it wasn't even close. The majority was overwhelming. Linda Carver was stripped of her position on the spot. The woman who had once ruled Pine Hollow with threats and paperwork was suddenly just another homeowner, and a deeply unpopular one at that. Within days of her removal, the lawsuit against me was officially withdrawn. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet filing that ended months of stress and uncertainty in a single sentence. But the consequences didn't stop there. Because the audit had uncovered potential violations, the state opened a formal investigation into Pine Hollow's finances and leadership practices. That investigation didn't focus on me at all. It focused squarely on Linda and how she'd handled HOA funds. The tone of everything changed after that. Vendors stopped returning her calls. Former allies distanced themselves. Homeowners who once nodded along now avoided eye contact. The authority she'd relied on evaporated almost overnight. Linda didn't just lose her title, she lost her credibility. In a community like Pine Hollow, reputation is everything. Once it's gone, there's no bylaws or legal threats that can bring it back. Within 3 months, her house went up for sale. The day the moving truck pulled out, I watched from the road as it disappeared down the highway, taking with it the person who had tried to use fear and power to control everyone around her. I didn't feel victorious in the way I expected. I felt something quieter, relief. Because the fight was finally over. And for the first time since that snowstorm, the roads weren't the only thing that had been cleared. The winter after everything settled down felt different, quieter. Not because there was less snow, there was plenty, but because the tension that had hung over the community for months was finally gone. Pine Hollow Estates did exactly what they could have done from the beginning. They hired a legitimate snow removal company from outside the county. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The rate they agreed to was significantly higher than what I'd originally quoted them, and they had to sign a long-term contract to secure the service. Suddenly, paying for snow removal didn't seem so unreasonable after all. There were no more emergency emails, no accusations, no threats, just invoices and scheduled service, the way it's supposed to work. The county didn't let the situation fade away either. The complaints, the lawsuit, and the audit had exposed gaps in how HOAs were being monitored. Within a few months, new oversight rules were put in place. HOAs were required to provide clearer financial reporting, stricter approval processes for legal expenses, and better documentation when filing complaints against local businesses. It didn't dismantle HOAs, but it put guardrails where there hadn't been any before. As for me, my business survived, and then some. Word travels fast in a small town. People had watched what happened. They saw that I didn't lash out, didn't cave, and didn't exploit the situation. I stuck to my rates, my rules, and my word. New customers started calling. Existing customers stayed loyal. By the next season, my schedule was fuller than it had ever been. I even upgraded my equipment, same truck, better plow. And for the first time since my dad passed, I felt confident about the future of the business. Amanda and I stayed in touch through all of it. She became something of a bridge between Pine Hollow and the rest of the community, helping smooth over relationships that had been strained by Linda's leadership. Over time, the neighborhood stopped feeling like an isolated enclave and started feeling like part of Willow Bend. There were block parties, fundraisers, people showed up to town events instead of sending complaints. The divide healed slowly, but it healed. And every now and then, someone would bring up the road. The private road that started all of this. They'd joke about it. Ask if I ever thought about plowing it after everything that happened. I always gave the same answer. No, not out of spite, not out of anger. But because it was never my responsibility in the first place. That road belonged to Pine Hollow, and they finally learned that ownership comes with responsibility. The snow fell. The plows ran. Life moved on. And for the first time in a long time, winter felt normal again. Looking back now, I can say with absolute certainty that this was never really about snow. Snow was just the excuse. The real issue was power. And what happens when someone convinces themselves that rules are something other people have to follow, not them? The HOA believed the law was a weapon they could point at anyone who didn't comply. They thought legal language and official letters would scare me into submission. Instead, the law did what it's supposed to do when it's forced into the light. It reflected the truth back at them, and they didn't like what they saw. Standing your ground is one of the hardest things you can do, especially when the pressure comes dressed up in authority and paperwork. There were nights I questioned myself, nights I wondered if giving in would be easier. But silence would have cost me far more than money. It would have cost me my livelihood and my self-respect. What this experience taught me is simple, but powerful. Documentation matters, community matters, and bullies, no matter how official they look, cannot survive daylight. If you're dealing with an HOA that's crossed the line, I want you to hear this clearly: you're not crazy, and you're not alone. There are ways to fight back that don't involve yelling, breaking rules, or becoming the villain in someone else's story. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?